Hello and welcome to Shaken Not Burned, a cocktail of solutions for a sustainable future. I am Giulia Bottaro and I'm joined today by my colleague Heather Dean Woody as our colleague Felicia Jackson is on holiday. So today we only have two stories that we wanted to discuss and then an interview that is a little bit longer than usual but really deserves the extra time. So Heather, why don't you tell us about your story of the week?
Thanks, Julia. Yeah. So I wanted to talk today about some research that has just come out by a ecosystem marketplace, which has found that the market value of carbon offsets has decreased by 61% in the course of a year. So from 2022 to 2023, it fell from £1.5 billion to around £723 million. And I think this is really important to talk about because basically, their hypothesis for why it's taken this drastic hit is because of the many, many stories we've seen about sort of the lack of rigor on carbon offsets, both in terms of scientific. There's been plenty of papers just saying that this isn't actually helping to reduce emissions or do what it says it's going to do, but then there's also been lots of complaints about human rights violations, land grabbing, all sorts of things that have basically just said that carbon offsets are not up to scratch. And private sector investors are really essentially just getting scared about the problems that could arise if they were to invest in these offsets that are then deemed not to be credible. And at the same time, it is quite worrying because although we don't want to be funding offsets that are doing more damage than good, the carbon markets have been set up just as a way to channel money into conservation and reforestation, afforestation, all these kinds of things. And those are things that we still need to be happening. So, we really do need to be avoiding deforestation. We need to be planting more trees. We need all these different nature-based solutions, and carbon markets are supposed to channel that finance in. So if investment is falling, then that also means that less money is going into these projects. So, the answer is not to invest. The answer is that we just need to get better at doing carbon offsets. And I did notice that President Biden in the past week has released sort of new principles on what quality carbon offsets could look like. But from a cursory glance, they just sort of look like the same kind of thing that we already have, saying, okay, well, carbon offsets should also have like social and economic benefits and, do no harm, basically, kind of thing. And I don't know, it leaves you feeling a little bit hopeless because we've been trying at this for so long, and there are so many different standards and methods of how we can monitor and measure and make sure that everything's tip top up to scratch, and it still isn't working. So I think it just leaves us in a really complex dilemma, and yeah, I wanted to get your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds to me, when I saw the Biden story, it was very celebrated, at least on my LinkedIn, that the US is taking a stance on this, and in a way, it's like the government has noticed this is a thing, and we need to do this well. But yeah, it sounds like there should be regulation on maybe the greenwashing around it, because ultimately that's what it is when offsets are being marketed as high quality and they're not, that is greenwashing. And I know sometimes that can be accidental, but at the same time it doesn't really excuse it. So yeah, we should probably need that, and maybe more education as well for whoever is buying. Have clear, because I think everyone is a bit confused by what the carbon markets even are, how they work, what each type of project means. I mean, before starting in sustainability, I thought that planting a tree is fine as long as you plant this tree, and later then I learned that actually it doesn't really work. It's not as simple as that, but it's possible that a lot of people out there are not really aware of the ins and outs of it. And to be fair, the carbon markets are incredibly complicated. It's a shame Felicia isn't here today because she's our resident expert of this topic. Um, so yeah, I think that, but I do agree with you that we need the carbon markets. Like these, it's a very important tool. It's not the only tool to mitigate climate change, but it's a very valid one, especially when it comes to channeling finances in places that have been lacking it and have been bearing the brunt of climate change.
I think it's kind of this, it's a bit of an unfortunate necessity, if you ask me, because, I would love to live in a world where we all just did these things automatically without this idea of marketization and investments. But, that is the society we live in. And, I'm not going to say that I hold the solution to this whole carbon markets thing. As I say, we've been like trying for decades now. As much as everyone says, "Oh, it's a new market, an emerging market," you're like, yes, this has been decades. It has been going on a fair while, and I think we're making improvements. Like, I think every time one of these big scandals unfolds, there is review and everything, but and there's plenty of startup companies and everything that are sort of boasting sort of stricter vetting processes, and I definitely think we are making improvements. I think the concern is that, maybe sort of some potential solutions I can point to would be maybe actually being a bit more lenient with companies and other private sector investors who are purchasing carbon offsets. Because if they were less fearful of being attacked for getting it wrong, then they might be still encouraged to put their money in and work towards making it better rather than just saying, okay, I'm going to get in trouble for this, I'm ducking out. I would also personally just advocate for any sort of ground up projects, these like grassroots projects run by Indigenous people and everything. If we can improve the access that those have to the carbon market, then we can prevent this kind of top down, oh yeah, sure, this will work kind of approach that seems to have caused a lot of problems.
Yeah, definitely. I think one thing that I'm not too excited about is the move from companies to insetting. So instead of offsetting by buying external credits, they inset by creating their own projects within, it's basically like a private initiative of
I
the
can do it better
company.
than you.
Yeah. And it's like, I know that there are rules around it and I know there is a big movement and there are, I'm not saying it's a terrible idea. I'm just saying that when it comes to transparency, a project carried out by a private company doesn't immediately sound more transparent than another project that's been on the market. How do you ensure that it's being carried out correctly? And there are examples of companies that started some insetting projects and abandoned them because they didn't deliver the desired results. And one of them is Shell. And I think it's enough to say the name without. So I mean, I don't necessarily think that the move to insetting is the most productive one in this
I'm
scenario.
inclined to agree with you there.
Amazing. Well, in which case I can move to my story, which I think should just get cheers and applause and excitement. So it's also in the US. Vermont has approved a bill to order fossil fuel companies to pay for climate damages. So it's become the first US state that will make the polluter pay. So this means that oil and gas companies are going to be held responsible for a certain part of greenhouse gas emissions that were generated by the state over the past 20 years. This is a huge victory for campaigners, especially because similar bills were proposed in other states but didn't go through. And Vermont is is a state that is suffering from climate change. For example, last year alone, there were $1 billion worth of damages following floods. So this is really important. So the concept of polluter pays already exists when it comes to companies polluting water sources. So it's sort of roughly based on that concept. And the new law doesn't specify how much money companies will have to pay. Um, but there will be a committee designated to provide a report by January 2026, outlining the cost of how much they think these greenhouse gas emissions generated by these companies, how much damage has been done, and then the money will be sort of invested in for the public. I think what is interesting here is that the governor of Vermont, Phil Scott, is actually Republican, and he signed the bill. Well, no, he allowed the bill to become law, but didn't sign it. But it's unlike the bill still made it without his approval. And he has warned that he thinks that big oil will sort of take on the little guy, which is Vermont. So it's been saying Vermont is a relatively small state, is not as rich as others, is not as densely populated, and there are expectations that oil companies will definitely uh, challenge this law in court. But overall, it's very exciting. And, the people behind this bill do think that there is grounds to still win the challenge in court. So, yeah, this is exciting.
I think it's really exciting for a number of reasons, actually. So, I mean, yes, Vermont might be a small state itself, but what this does is it kind of sets a precedent, not a legal precedent that will bind other states, but it serves as an inspiration more than anything. And then you think of, maybe California or something, which is one of the world's biggest economies in itself and has been sort of a pioneer of some kind of, clean environment legislation and everything. If they can see that, oh, Vermont's done this, then for them to implement something similar would be a really big deal. So I think it is hopefully the start of a very positive chain reaction. The other thing that I think is exciting about this, and this is maybe me being a bit nerdy, but just sort of the fact that it's possible that we now have the methodologies to kind of calculate the costs of those emissions, that pollution, and associate it back to specific companies. I think that's a real opportunity that we can kind of carry on with.
Yeah, no, I agree. And actually, you mentioned California, and the state of California took major oil companies to court because they allege that they've been misleading the public on the truth around what happens by extracting and using fossil fuels, global warming and general pollution. So it feels like maybe there is some movement in the states to quote unquote rebel to oil and gas companies. And of course, it's not illegal to extract oil and gas. And at the time it was, and we still rely on these type of technologies to power transport and energy. But then at the same time, we can't just disregard the damage that has been done in the past, because in the past we wanted it. And we really need to move forward because someone has to pay for all these damages. And countries globally are figuring out ways to pay for climate damage in the global south. For example, we discussed this quite a bit in our previous episode, and the same goes for very polluting industries. So yeah, I think that this is the start of something really important.
I think, it's a nice note to end on, just to say that however frustrating and incrementally slowly things are moving forward, I do feel like they are edging there. And, yes, it needs to be accelerated rapidly. Yes, we need it to expand and spread and morph and bring on new responsibilities and everything. But there are steps happening in the right direction, and we've got to take some hope from that.
Yes, let's all notice the good steps. We'll now take a little break and then move to the interview of the week. I'm joined today by Filippo Addari, CEO and co-founder of PlusValue. Thank you so much, Filippo, for being with us today.
Thank you, Giulia. I'm honored and delighted. And I must say, a great admirer of independent journalists.
Oh, thank you. That really warms my heart and the heart of my colleagues as well, who are not here at the moment. Maybe we can start by discussing PlusValue, what you do, your mission, and then we can delve into social impact and finance.
Yes, sure. So, PlusValue is, how could I define it? It's an advisory company specialized in social impact strategies. I set it up in 2015 with my business partner at the time, Fiorenza Lipparini. And the idea was to bring the social impact investing principles at the core of the business strategy of large market players. Imagine I know perhaps I shouldn't use this expression, like viruses contaminating with positive values about the planet and society, those gigantic predators, in order to reshape, redesign their feeding habits. I mean, not totally, but to have a more balanced diet. And we did it because we worked for many years with government and international organizations. I had also despite my Italian citizenship, I did work actually a lot with the British government in remote years, and with the European institutions and with international organizations like UN agencies, and doing a lot of policy work, designing the markets of the future, markets that were shaped to foster innovation towards sustainability. And, after a while, after many years you work on those policies, you start thinking, isn't anything turning into real impact on the ground, changing the lives of people, but especially changing the behavior and the ideas of people, changing the economy, changing society, where you can have a tangible view of your work. And we created the PlusValue because at a certain point we were fed up of writing papers and questioning about their impact. And so ultimately it's about engaging those companies, but also companies means people. And in particular decision makers within companies who can handle the power, they have the agency to change the rules of the game. Naturally, to do it with a business sense, so not campaigners. I did that when I was in my 20s, but I stopped very quickly because I realized, even less impact. While working with those business leaders to explain that it's possible to embed the principles of sustainability and social impact in the business strategy of the business, and it's good business.
Okay, wow, amazing. Thanks for the detail of the start of the company and where you are now. And so what type of companies do you work with, and do you find that businesses are willing to create that impact that you were talking about?
So our experience is mainly with urban developers and asset managers, large-scale asset managers. And that was a conscious choice. Urban regeneration, especially in Western countries, So that the investments that transform large chunks of our cities into new cities is one of the most impactful business activity on the lives, on everything that shapes the life of people, as a long-term effect, and by its nature is not just about money and profit. Because in urban regeneration, and I'm not saying anything particularly smart and insightful, this is common knowledge in business. If you create a good place, if you create a place which is green, which is healthy, where there are good public services, good businesses, where there are job opportunities, where it's safe to go out, where you enjoy to spend time with your community, you know what it happens? The value of your properties increase. And so this is what I mean good business. You can actually invest, you can make good money, and at the same time, you can do an excellent job for society and the rest of the world. So based on that, we started engaging developers, because ultimately developers are really the engines behind the transformation of cities, especially places like London. And somehow selling this idea, not having a model, not having a product, to be honest, but more an aspiration. And clearly, behind those developers, there are a lot of actually all the main institutional investors which are providing the billions. If you look at the several urban development projects in London, I don't know, for instance, Elephant and Castle. Oh, the most famous one, probably King's Cross. Behind those projects, there are billions of our money. Because when we say pension funds, insurance, they are our money. So it's also a way to get our money to do the work we would like money to do. So to build thriving, beautiful, healthy, green, safe cities.
What's not to love? Can we talk about some of the instruments, the financial instruments that you can use to create the social impact?
Yeah, you're right. Because those are beautiful ideas, and who would be against it? Nobody, clearly. We all buy into this. But it boils down on feasibility, and business is all about that. It's about turning those aspirations and dreams into viable business propositions. Now, and this is where we move from the realm of dreams and a warm discussion into a more cold financial instruments discussion, which doesn't excite anybody. So I want to give you an example that I think is still that sparkle of dream amongst all the financial products. The social impact bond, especially because the social impact bond is an invention of the UK. We know the story, it has been documented, and as something that always makes me smile of joy. So social impact bonds, first of all, are not bond. So it's not debt issued by a government, by a corporation, but bonds stands for connection, link. And it's already beautiful to think about a financial product as a relationship. And it came out of a very long gestation of what is called the social finance impact investing. That started really at the beginning of 2000 in the UK, in a small circle of people, bankers, policymakers, philanthropists, were thinking about how to use private capital to make a difference in society but not as a donation, but as an investment. So to bring together the private means and the public value, the forces of the market, and in the city in particular, and the aspiration to a better society, in particularly in areas in which the state has not been very successful. In some areas like, for instance, homelessness, children poverty in post-industrial regions, where nobody's investing anymore. And but the core of the social impact bond is the merge between the public and the private sector, is the idea of selecting a public cause by the public institutions, setting the targets, and opening to the private sector to come up with the money, with this entrepreneurial solution, so the innovation, and manage the process to deliver results. And at the end of this journey, based on a rigorous methodology and a process of monitoring and reporting, rewarding the success of the private enterprise and the risk taken by private companies, by the state paying for the results. There is my favorite catchphrase is to say, is the state going shopping for results that matter to people? But ultimately, it's also a way to say, using every pound of the public budget to generate value for the community, using market forces, using enterprises, using private capital. And there was actually in 2010, so this idea has been in gestation for a very long time. I think 2000 was the first task force. So, and it's well documented, by the way, if you then the readers, your audience wants to know, want the references. I'm happy to share this beautiful story.
Yeah, we can add some links to the show notes.
In 2010, government launched the first social impact bond, and which was a total experiment. And even this idea of using experimentation in a public-private partnership is, in my view, beautiful these days, more really a reference for how to tackle the global challenges we face. So it was launched. It's called the Social Impact Bond of St. Petersburg. Forgive me for my terrible pronunciation. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing. It's the name of prison. And so the Social Impact Bond was about tackling reoffending. So as everybody knows in the field, the justice system is pretty poor at redeeming people. So people go to prison not to be just punished. That's not the point. The point is to help people not to offend again and change life, as you would do in some cases with naughty children. You don't punish them because you're a sadist, but because you want them to learn. And so we know that prisons are not very effective and the rates of reoffending is very high. I'm not going into details now. I'm more interested in explaining the mechanism. And so the Social Impact Bond was ultimately a coalition created by social finance as a similar PlusValue type of organization, much bigger, much older, and a set of philanthropic institutions and charities specialized in helping people to improve their lives. And so this Social Impact Bond was an agreement between the government, those organizations, and the government set up the targets. So you will work with 3 cohorts of prisoners and you will provide all the services, all the methodology you believe are the best ones in order to help these people when they come out of prison not to reoffend anymore, we will measure this. And we give you all the criteria, the KPIs. So it's about training, it's self-inclusion. They are not going to reoffend for the next 3 years. And if you reach these results, we will reward you. So we will pay you for the results that you bring us. So that was really the first social impact bond ever done concretely in the world. It was in the UK. And there has been a lot of talking about this, but ultimately it was a success. And the program was then this new, let's say, training program was adopted by government and roll out, which is, in my view, a sign of success. Now, also to give you a sense of how these innovative instruments grow, because it's not just about the experimentation. Ultimately, you do an experimentation because then you want to scale in order to get a greater impact. Today, and we are in 2024, so 14 years later, there are almost, sorry, I'm terrible with, I don't have a numerical memory. Again, I will send you the sources, but we are talking about almost 300 bonds, social impact bonds worldwide, of which at least 1/3 is in the UK, and they have been applied to all sorts of sectors. For instance, there is one in Portugal I love because it was used to incentivize the digital training of kids. So to get kids to learn how to programming. And ultimately it was to incentivize schools, elementary schools, into this. So it can be used in many ways. In Israel, it was used to incentivize better nutritional habits, diet, so decrease sugar intake, and so tackle diseases like obesity and all food-related or bad diet, unhealthy diet diseases. So it can get very complex in terms of the chain you tackle. It's all about, ultimately, there is a very important role of finance, and it has been applied also in developing countries for aid programs in order to, there is a lot of debate, especially now, how we use aid in Western countries. It has been used so it has been applied to the aid budget in order to not to use aid for instrumental reasons, for funding programs of which we don't know where the money go, but to pay for results. And that was, for instance, done by the Red Cross in Congo DRC, one of the most challenging countries in which you can operate, to reward the successful programs that was about, for the cure, for the health system, for the cure and social reintegration of people affected by war and conflict in Congo.
PlusValue also had a project in Italy with prisoners. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes, I didn't want to do self-promotion. You're right. So yes,
let's do a little bit.
A little bit. So yes, we did the first one on prisoners. So it's inspired by the first social impact bond in the UK, but with a variant, because ours was about social inclusion, work inclusion of convicts when they are still in prison. So not waiting for them to get out, but still serving their sentence. In Italy, you have the possibility, Italian law gives the opportunity to convicts to work outside of the prison. Clearly, if they behave and if the judge sanction this, then they can be employed in and do a job as anybody else, and then in the evening they go back to the prison. So we launched because we were involved in Milan with the as part of Mind Milan Innovation District, another project on which we were working on, and sits next to a prison. So we design, first of all, a program more up to study the methodology about how about convicts working in the construction sector, in particularly in the construction site next to the prison. And that was so successful that we decided to design a social impact bond with idea of scaling up what was a program with something like 30 convicts a year. But, in Italy, and this is probably a case, the proportions are more or less, you have 60 million people, 70,000 people in prison, of which roughly 5,000 could be enrolled in this program. So it's a substantial number. And in our program, almost 100% of the people enrolled in this program did not offend again, which is massive. Not only they retained the job, so they started the job while they were in prison, and then they left the prison. It's more effective when they do it a few years before serving the full sentence. And then they left. Yes, they essentially left the prison and they were in job, which is always a big challenge for people coming out of prison. And in that case, again, we designed the program with the European Investment Bank, which backed us in designing this project. I must say that, unfortunately, we were not able to launch that social impact bond because of politics. And there was a change of governments during that time 3 times. And, politics is important for this kind of projects. So innovation, but, Mariana Mazzucato probably would sign for it. And she, politics and political sponsorship on innovation, especially innovation that brings together institutional change and private finance, so complexity. You need political sponsorship.
So what was the reason to not back it from the government?
Fear. Because when you don't have political sponsorship, or when you have constant change of government, so you don't have a political sponsor who really understands and back in an initiative like this one, you fall into the, only civil servants are the ones who can ensure continuity. And civil servants, I would say, are normally very resistant, but it's also fair to say that they don't have an incentive for innovation. A civil servant typically will be penalized for failing, trying to innovate. And, when you innovate, failure is always a possibility. But the same civil servant succeeding with innovation is unlikely to be rewarded. So all the incentives are against any good civil servant who's trying to innovate. But politicians are very different. Politicians must do it to survive and get elected again. If you don't have politicians, then especially when you try to do something like a social impact bond the first time, in my experience, is really difficult. And by the way, I don't like to tell fools. Those social impact bonds are complex and difficult, and they don't always succeed. So, for instance, the one that was launched by Bloomberg when he was mayor of New York, together in partnership with Goldman, so top investment bank. And it was about reducing reoffending of minors. That was a failure, and the program was discontinued. And there have been many other failures.
Yeah, I suppose when it comes to society, to people, sometimes there are factors that are not as scientific as maybe it happens with environmental initiatives.
Yes, I mean science. Science is an instrument, is a tool. Science give you the framework to understand the problem, helps you to design solutions, but science is never per se the solution, especially when society is not nature in this sense, and social sciences are not physics. So society, we might go into an epistemological discussion, but it's very important because these days we talk a lot about sustainable finance and environmental criteria and social criteria. Forgive me for using the word, but ontologically, they are not the same thing. And so while environmental criteria, at least in their essence, follow physics, biology, chemistry, humans are not like atoms. Despite the belief of some economists, humans they are subject to the laws of natures, but they also have agency, for instance. So you cannot just kick them and get them to do whatever you want, because they are unlikely to go where you want. And this is a very important principle when you design financial instruments with a social purpose. You will always have finance, which is ultimately probably one of the most numerical, quantitative amongst all the economic sciences. But when you add the element of social, environmental dimensions all together, the mix is an interesting, unpredictable combination.
Thank you, Filippo, for explaining all of this. I think it's time to wrap up. We're slightly over the usual time of our interviews, but I think it's been such a fun conversation, and you've managed to make finance super engaging. So thanks for that. As you said, at some point during the conversation, we're now going into the boring bit that is finance, but actually it wasn't. It was really, really interesting. So thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you, Giulia. It was my pleasure, and good luck with your enterprise, and see you soon.
Thank you, Filippo. And thanks to our listeners for following us. Don't forget to subscribe to wherever you listen to your podcast, and follow us on social media too. See you next week.